Welcome to the Sean Chandler Podcast, a place to talk movies, TV, and nerdy stuff way too much. I'm joined today by Cody Leach here in studio, specifically his studio because I'm in Georgia at his house, not at my house. And we just wanted to, as long as we're here, it seemed like a great time to pause and talk about movies way too much. And with that in mind, all the previous episodes have had Griffin with me. Griffin's not here in Georgia. That's the only reason he's not joining. We're just doing an in-studio show. So if was originally planning to go to California for my 40th birthday, and so he would have been there if we'd been in California, but we're in Georgia. So that's the whole backstory on that if you're wondering why Griffin isn't here. He's literally not here. So, but yeah, I've been here for a few days. I take off tomorrow, and it's been fun. We went to visit where Forrest Gump was shot.
Yes.
And it looks a little bit different now. It's a
skosh.
The bench is gone. Things are overgrown, and there's an enormous number of tourists there looking at everything, snapping pictures, standing in the middle of the road. Me being one of those people that did that, but that's been fun. Cody cooks a lot, so he's been cooking for me all week, and he cooks very well. So that's also been a lot of fun.
It's been fun.
I guess it's good. I'm glad you're saying it's fun because that was my follow-up question. How horrible has it been?
No, I'm somebody that enjoy, just even on the cooking side, I kind of like to show off. So my family's used to it, so they don't care anymore. They're like, yeah, we know you cook good. Who cares? So when I get somebody new, I'm like, all right, here we go. And so every night I'm like, all right, we're having this. And Sean I think a third of the time that you've been here, I'm just in the kitchen. Like,
yeah.
All right, we're going to do this.
Even somebody went like, hey, when are you guys going to start? We started a few minutes late. That's because he was prepping tonight's barbecue, making his own barbecue sauce before we got started.
3 of them.
3 different barbecue sauces from scratch. So that's what my time has been here, eating amazing food, visiting sites, and introducing Cody to Fortnite.
Yes.
He'd never played the game before. He played for the first time last night and got 6 victory royales in a row. Like, what is going on here? Who is this person? This Fortnite prodigy right here.
There you go.
So it's been a lot of fun. We've been talking on the YouTube for 5.5 years now, done an enormous number of even podcasts before. And this was the first time we've ever met in person. So
finally.
Pretty cool. I've
showed up at his house unannounced numerous times, but they just wouldn't answer the door. So
who's that person in front yard? So there you have it. Today, what we wanted to do is just talk about a couple of things that were relevant to movies recently, and then tackle a few more subjects. The 2 big ones from this past weekend would be video game movies. We got Uncharted, and general consensus, people had fun with it, but not a great adaptation.
Yeah.
So the question comes up, why haven't we gotten a great video game movie yet? And then the other thing,
passionate thoughts about this one.
The second one being, we got a new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie that kind of falls into that reboot quill legacy sequel. And people have a lot of thoughts on those too. In fact, last month, we got a whole movie about horror reboot quills. And this movie seems to just like split the fan base. So
Once again, the greatest movie ever and the worst movie ever all at the same time, and nothing in the middle. Otherwise, just don't speak.
And so then what we wanted to do, pause and talk about those 2 subjects, plus a few more, and then probably take a few questions at the end of this. So first subject we will be discussing today, why hasn't there been a great video game movie? And there have been good ones. There have been ones that I think are cult classics. There's been enjoyable ones. You know, somebody threw in the chat, procrastinates or Mortal Kombat 95 is incredible.
I've said for a couple of years now that the fact that Mortal Kombat 95 is still the greatest video game ever made is a bit pathetic.
Right. And I saw it in the theater. Like I was I was the target. I was 13, 14 when it came out. I was the target demographic. I've got all the nostalgia as anyone else for that movie. But if you're talking about like a great video game movie, it really is a bad sign when that movie came out 27 years ago.
Yes.
And that's the one that we're coming up with.
Yes.
There's good ones, there's enjoyable ones, but why isn't there a great one? Take it away.
The way that I always see the problem is that you have 2 different approaches that filmmakers take or studios take when adapting video games. They either take face value stuff, they take the title, they take the general look, they take some character names, maybe a couple of scenes or sequences right out of the games, but they completely miss the story or the heart or how all those things fit together. And so that approach always feels like they're taking something and taking a familiar look of something and trying to make it completely different to appeal to everybody that has never played the games.
Mhm.
And then you have the opposite approach, which is where they try to very faithfully adapt games that sometimes take 10, 20, 30 hours into a 2-hour story. And then you run into the opposite problem. You get all the fan service, you get all of these direct recreations, you get all the characters right, but then it doesn't really work as a movie. And we've never had anybody fit both of those in a perfect mix. Like we have Uncharted, which very much is this category, where we're going to take Uncharted, we're going to get some things that appear like Uncharted, we're going to take sequences directly out of the games, we're going to cast a couple of stars that really have no business playing these characters, although I did like Tom Holland more than I thought I would. And we're going to make it this big blockbuster movie that appeals to general audiences while alienating the Uncharted fans.
Yeah.
And then just last year, you had Resident Evil, which was the opposite, where I watch it and I'm like, oh, that's right out of the game. That's a direct Itchy Tasty. That's right from the first one. It looks just like, and then you watch it and you're like,
what is this?
Yeah, none of this.
I'm missing out on an in-joke.
Yes.
So not a joke, but same idea.
Exactly. So nobody seems to be able to get both, where they can appeal to the fans and respect the source material while making it accessible.
Mm-hmm. I think some of it is video games are designed for that experience of gameplay.
Yeah, interactivity.
And a movie is designed for sitting passively watching.
Yes.
And so I think some of it historically is, Mortal Kombat, it's tough to make a movie out of that because the original games, there's like one paragraph.
Yeah.
And then there's like a little paragraph for each person's backstory. Yeah. But there's not a story in the same sense we think about story, in which case in later games, I know develop that and have mythology, but at the core of a tournament, it's just people show up to fight and everyone has a backstory and a motivation, but
and a weird power.
Mm-hmm. But it's not designed to be a story in the traditional sense where there's characters that face obstacles to achieve a goal. And then
they ran into that problem with the most recent movie where they nailed the fan service for the most part. They got the fatalities. Yeah. They all looked like the characters. There's great fight scenes, but then everybody's like, this story sucks.
Yeah.
And they try to shove this new character in to make a story. And everybody's like, get him out of here.
Right.
Murder him right away in the second movie.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then you have other ones where you have a different problem. Like, so Uncharted, mm-hmm. It's like on a plate. It actually is cinematic. Yeah. It's Mortal Kombat. We got to work hard to find a story here. Uncharted is an actual story with a beginning, middle, and end, action set pieces, character moments.
Yes.
And I think you run into the problem of studio executives that just don't even know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe they've had successes, but they don't understand what they're adapting. I think a classic example of this, and I told you this story a couple days ago, was David Goyer, the writer of Man of Steel, mm-hmm. has over the last few years given some interviews where he's just told what was really going on behind the scenes. And he talked about how he turned in his script for Man of Steel, mm-hmm. Superman. And one of the notes he got back from an executive was like, hey, just if you can adjust the script just a little minor note, make sure you don't blow up Superman's ship at the end of the movie, because otherwise the audience will wonder how Superman going to get back to his planet. Mm-hmm. And of course, obviously, the whole premise of the movie is that Superman's planet blew up.
Yeah, in the first 7 minutes.
That's the start of the movie. And if you have this much knowledge of Superman, that's the whole plot. His planet blew up. He's the last son of Krypton.
Yeah.
And the person controlling the movie, the person writing the checks, the person with the ability to write notes, both didn't know that about Superman and read the script, and his comprehension was so low that he went, we got to make sure that he can get back to his planet.
Yeah. Obviously.
Those are the people that are like, let's adapt Uncharted. You know who's our main guy? Tom Holland. Yeah. Tom Holland. Well, Nathan Drake in the first game's
like 35.
35. He's established grown up. That's part of his character. It's not that he's like a young, impressionable kid and the games have an origin and it's not Tom Holland.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's Spider-Man, so let's go with him.
Yeah, so they have to doctor the whole movie,
thing.
Tom Holland.
And so all of a sudden, if he's 25, then you suddenly have to de-age Sully by 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. And then you get Mark Wahlberg in it who doesn't look or act right. And you miss so much of what was key there. Was the movie fun? Yes. Did it feel like it had the heart of the game? No. You kind of put all those pieces together of people making decisions that don't get it. Games are designed for gameplay. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of times there's a lot of mythology in all these different games, and you have to like pick and choose which one you're going to pick from to create your game. I think all that just makes it really, really tough. Some people threw some things in here like Detective Pikachu and Free Guy were great. Well,
Free Guy's not a video game.
I don't think you in the same sense. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's a character in a video game, but I think to your point, Free Guy is probably better than every video game movie ever.
Yes, I would say that definitively.
And it's not an adaptation of a video game.
Yeah.
Where it had to stick to the plot of the video game. Therefore, you can tell the story of this character coming to life.
Yeah.
And it's in a video game, but it's not an adaptation of the same steps. Detective Pikachu, I think, is really good. I don't know that I would go with great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing. Like, did you really enjoy it? But is this like universally acclaimed as great?
And I don't know if you know the answer to this question because I actually still have not seen Detective Pikachu, but is it a story that's actually an adaptation of a game, or do they just take the concept of Pikachu as a detective and build a movie with Ryan Reynolds?
There's a Game Boy game, Detective Pikachu.
Okay.
I haven't played it.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. So I don't know the plot of it. So I can't tell you.
Gotcha.
So I don't know how much it is actually an adaptation of but it feels to me like they went, let's take this concept.
Yeah, put Ryan Reynolds
and then you'd have this story about you tell a story that's more elaborate than I believe and more personal than is in. If you're playing around in the world of Pokemon,
yes,
and with Pikachu, you're playing around in that world, but I don't know if it is, and I don't know if you guys are in the chat and have actually played Detective Pikachu. You know this stuff better than me if it does follow the story, but it felt like they kind of made their own story rather than following some of that stuff. So what would you say is the best one that's done the best job of balancing some of it?
The Tomb Raider movie was pretty decent. The most recent one, it ran into the same problem as Uncharted. It's a very derivative style of movie. And so even though it might capture some of the heart of that reboot video game, people that go see the movie are just like, okay, well, I'd just rather watch Indiana Jones. I'd rather watch National Treasure. So that was pretty good. I personally really liked Resident Evil, but I saw all of the flaws as far as just a movie audience. I can't think of one, honestly, that's just been like, man, that was great. Even Sonic's the one that everybody thinks is great, but that's not an adaptation. That's taking the character and putting them in a movie. And
that like it was a fun movie. My kids put it on a lot, want to watch it a lot. They're excited for the sequel. We bought Sonic Monopoly because they don't play the Sonic games, but they like the movie. And so we have Sonic Monopoly, and that's what we do for family game night, which is interesting because Monopoly is already kind of an advanced game for kids, and then they add new rules that are Sonic based. So that's been a fun adventure trying to explain Monopoly to them with Sonic terms. Anyway, but
I guess technically Alien versus Predator. That's
technically,
that's another thing though. It's just a concept.
But like Sonic, video games aren't about Sonic coming to Earth and being on a road trip with a local cop going to a coastal city. No, that's not the plot of. They just took the heart of the character, and that's why people had fun with it. And that's why also when they listened to the audience fans and they went, let's fix the design. We really want them to like our character. That's why people embraced it, but they really didn't adapt the story at all. Yeah. It's just not what it is.
I think you skipped a super chat.
We got in here. Daniel Skinner chimed in. As someone who is a casual House of the Dead fan, I finally sat down to watch the movie last night on Hulu. It's very bad. Have you guys seen it? I have not seen it. I've not played the game or seen it.
I actually have a funny story. I'll try to make it quick. So, yes, I was a big House of the Dead fan. There used to be those arcade machines in a lot of restaurants where I grew up in Ohio. And so I played a lot of House of the Dead, even played it on Dreamcast. So when the movie came out, I'm young. I'm a kid. It came out like in 2000, 1999, something like that. So I'm like 10 years old, 11 years old. I didn't have any taste at that point. I'm like, oh, it's going to be great because the games are great, obviously. We rented the movie, and my dad had this surround sound system. And I remember there was a piece where you can show where you want the sound to be. Like if you want to be more towards the front, to the back, to the side. It was just this little spindle where you would put where you want the sound direction to kind of go. Most of the time you have it in the middle. And so we turned the movie on, and apparently at some point my little brother had turned the volume all the way up while the thing was off. And so the DVD menu came up and just boom all over the house. And I was like, oh, we ran, turned it down. And my dad freaked out thinking that I did it. We turned it down, and suddenly the sound was only coming out of one speaker. And so he's like, you blew my speaker. And the spindle thing had been turned to the right. So he spent 2 hours like making me think my life was going to be over soon because his speaker. And then we figured it out. So I'll always remember that god awful movie just for that reason.
So it asks, have you guys played the Tomb Raider games? Is it fun and cinematic as Uncharted? I've only played the reboot from like 2013 after Uncharted.
It's very much influenced
Yeah.
by Uncharted, which was influenced by the original Tomb Raider, but they,
Short answer is yes. They're very much similar sorts of experience.
A little darker, a little grittier.
Yeah, yes. That's a good way to describe it. Like same sort of gameplay, same cinematic story, dark, like she's much
bloody.
more peril, bloody, and less like the game is fun, but it's the nature of it isn't as fun with what's happening to her. But the game is still fun. That's not a negative on it. That's just the tone of it in general. Where Uncharted, it's all these wild adventures, and you describe it as fun more so.
Yeah.
But yes is the simple answer to your question. Any other thoughts on video game movies and what for Uncharted 2 could they do to do a better job?
They need to adjust the Sully character a little bit. They need to find a happy medium between Mark Wahlberg's personality, because I think he had good chemistry with Tom Holland.
Yeah, but
it's just not Sully. So they need to find a way to bridge that gap a bit. And I think they need to stick more to the actual story that's being set up, because they've spoiler alert, but they have hinted by the end of the film where they're going to be going. And if they're going to go that direction, that story is literally already gift packaged for them. So if they start playing very free with it and just artificially, superficially, it looks like that game, you're going to alienate the fans once again. I think they've got enough goodwill to where fans can be like, okay, we'll give you a second shot. And it's making money, but if they screw it up a second time, I don't think they'll get a third one. Yeah,
I think there's a big sit down with Mark Wahlberg and say, I know you like to look like you're 40. The character doesn't.
Yeah.
So you got to go with the gray hair. You got to let your age show.
Yeah.
You are 50
and grow an actual mustache, not a little pencil.
Yeah, not whatever that thing is. You're not.
Yeah.
You're not doing a remake of Boogie Nights here as the director. You're not in. What are you doing here, man? Look the part and don't just do your Mark Wahlbergisms.
Yeah.
You have to become that character, not turn that character into you.
Yes.
I think that's a big part of it. But
and I have big faith that The Last of Us HBO series hopefully will be the one to turn the conversation finally. And you'll start to get more people interested in making limited series on video games that are not adaptable to a 2-hour movie, like Metal Gear Solid is a perfect example.
Here's what I throw in here. Halo series looks great as a fan of the actual game. I have almost no experience with Halo. Like I have played Halo, but I did Call of Duty more, and then in the 90s, Wolfenstein, Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem 3D. Halo is one of those big spots. Like I have very little experience. What do you think about that one?
I've got a good amount of Halo experience, but I'm not what you would call a fan. I've never really been a huge fan of the games until the most recent one, which I love. So with that being in mind, I watched the trailer and I thought it looked awesome. It looks like the game. It looks... the special effects look great. All the villains look spot on. I mean, it literally looks like the video game brought to life. So it's just going to depend on the story, because there's been reports that Master Chief is going to be a side character and there's going to be a female protagonist that's going to be our main character. And of course, you already know where that conversation has gone on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, it's frustrating because there's a side to it of like, if they really do that, dude, what are you guys doing? And then if it's only a little bit, and he is the lead character, but it's a little bit, then you just know they're going to run with that. There's a no win when that gets the blood gets in the water in the sense. So I just watched the trailer and went, okay, cool sci-fi. I'm going to check this out. It's got Pablo Schreiber, Liev Schreiber's brother, is Master Chief. So I went, okay, yeah, this seems like the sort of thing I would check out, even as someone that doesn't really know the games. But I haven't got a good vibe for what the internet's take on it, besides the people that are preemptively angry in advance.
I personally think Master Chief will work well as a side character because, I mean, then again, I'm casual fan, but he's soldier guy, and you spend a lot of time in first person. It's not like an Uncharted, like a Nathan Drake situation where there's a lot of development. And so I think his placement in the story, just like with Halo Infinite, you had this human pilot that was kind of your bridge the gap between the audience and Master Chief. I think you could have something like that. So as long as their decision is story based and not just we got a female protagonist. Yes.
We shall see. We got a super chat come in. The Uncharted film just makes me wish they'd used the cast from the fan film a few years ago starring Nathan Fillion. So if you guys don't know, about 5 years back, they put out little 15-minute fan film. Nathan Fillion as Nathan Drake, and then Stephen Lang as Sully, and then a few other familiar faces. I don't remember who the other people were in it, but it just like was really good casting. And the bit, I mean, I think even Stephen Lang, even more so as Sully, was like, yeah, that's amazing casting. Why don't you do that? And I think it, to your point,
Nathan Fillion's not a box office draw.
Right.
That's the simple answer.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then he is 50.
Yeah.
So he's probably 10, 15 years too late to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe right after Firefly, Serenity might have been a good window, but that was right as the first game came out. So I get why they didn't do it. I didn't expect them to. At the same time, I think Stephen Lang could have been that person. But if you do Tom Holland, who's 25,
and
looks 18, and convincingly played a high schooler 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, Stephen Lang seems too old to play that character. That's where you kind of handcuff yourself a little bit when you do that. But when you have a point of comparison in live action, it highlights how far off something can be. And I think Mark Wahlberg, much more so even than Tom Holland. Tom Holland just, I think, was too young, but had the right energy and stuff.
Yeah.
Mark Wahlberg just full blown seems horribly cast in the role. All right. Our buddy Zach Pope had a question for us. Final, probably one on the subject, and then we'll move on to horror films. Zach Pope, how excited are you guys for the Last of Us series? I know Cody's played the games. Not sure if Sean has yet as well. What game do you believe, if adapted, could be amazing? So I have played like 3 hours of Last of Us. I bought it right after I binged through the Uncharted games. I binged through them whenever COVID lockdowns first hit 2 years ago. You told me to play them, started, and then I didn't stop until I was done.
Yeah.
And so my only video game franchise ranking I ever did was Uncharted. Thought it was great. And then the next obvious thing to follow up was Last of Us, but I guess by then enough things had happened that I couldn't continue the momentum. So I played it a little bit. And the other piece to it, my wife likes adventure movies, like loves Indiana Jones.
She would not enjoy some of the story direction in Last of Us.
And zombie stuff she hates, and then the dark, depressing stuff.
Yes.
That's not her thing at all. And so then it became, I have to play this when she's not in the room. I have to play this. That was just more hoops to jump through. That's why I haven't played Last of Us yet. I fully plan to, especially whenever we get closer to everything. How excited am I for the series? It looks like it has a story that's very adaptable. Seems like that's what they're doing. And they got a great cast.
Yes. And HBO always has amazing production value. Like, and I usually complain that HBO shows pacing always seems to be very deliberate. I mean, Game of Thrones, you have whole seasons where people are just walking.
Yeah.
And Sopranos, same thing. Those seasons where not a whole lot happens technically. And I think that type of approach actually is perfect for Last of Us, because that's literally the story. It's them traveling across the country over almost an entire year. So I'm over the moon excited for it. That's my most anticipated adaptation by miles. And like I said earlier, I think that if it's as good as I think it's going to be, I think that is going to be what's going to change the conversation and the approach, a la Iron Man, to how people approach video game adaptations. When you have things like Metal Gear Solid, these long, sprawling, huge, epic stories that people have been trying to adapt into 2.5 hour movies tops, it's just impossible to do without extremely alienating the fans or just wiping out a lot of the story. And so I think The Last of Us, if it succeeds, you're going to see a lot more of that approach. Or Halo. Halo's another one where they're going to go, hey, this works better as a
series, not squishing it into 2 hours. And that's also, I think you see that with book adaptations over the last few years with the rise of streaming and limited series having a place now, that they're doing these adaptations on Netflix and these other streaming services, and they're just working better.
Yeah,
there's more time to do it properly, and it's being received better. So I think there's a lot of things that streaming is the future, and that's actually a topic we're going to get into with some other things as well. But first up, let's move on to our second major topic of the day. And I phrased it at why are fandoms currently so divided? And this is coming, basically, Texas Chainsaw Massacre dropped Friday a few days ago. And I hop on Twitter whenever I wake up. The movie drops at 2 a.m. Central. So I wake up 5 hours later. My Facebook feed, my Twitter feed, everything is loaded with exclusively polarizing takes on the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre film. So I had no idea there were that many passionate Texas Chainsaw Massacre fans.
Neither did
I. And if you haven't seen it, we're not going to this isn't really specifically about the movie, so it's not, you don't need to tune out or anything like that.
There's a whole lot to spoil.
Yeah, there's not a lot to spoil, but that's not where this is going. It's more about what is it going on right now that it seems like there's so many fandoms that are just like splitting and being condescending to each other and not being able to agree to disagree. Yeah. Everybody has to have a reason why the other person is wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not just taste.
Yeah.
And what's your initial thoughts on that, in particular taking this Texas Chainsaw Massacre and as our current example, but you can go through any of the recent ones. Halloween Ends or Kills not so long ago. Of course, Last Jedi. Why do we keep dividing like this? Eternals.
I think one of the big problems is that you have people that they take the freedom of the anonymity online way too far. They know that they can go with extreme opinions and there's not really any consequences for it. They can say the worst things to people and it doesn't matter. They can just turn the phone off. I mean, so there's the root of the problem.
And tied to that, saying something horrible to a username is very different than saying something to someone's face. And so, like, even on here, I'm looking at the chat and none of you have your picture up.
Yeah.
And so if I'm responding to you, you're just generic username.
Yeah.
You're not a person with feelings and a history, a mom, dad, maybe kids, all that fun stuff. You're just username. It's a lot easier to be mean to username than to Cody Leach seated next to me.
I think another part of the problem too is that I think movie critique, sometimes you kind of have to be able to articulate your thoughts and kind of sort your thoughts in your head. And I think a lot of people just don't invest themselves that much in the movie experience like we do. And so they come away with very just generic good or bad. Yeah. My wife's kind of that way. When we watch a movie, it's either an F or an A. You know, it's awesome or it was horrible, even if it was middle of the road for them. And so that's another part of the problem, that, like, specifically with horror fans, at least what I would think is part of the issue with this is that we've seemed to grown into two different camps for the most part in horror. You have people that are now really embracing what they call elevated horror, where you have Robert Eggers, you've got Ari Aster, you've got Jordan Peele that are doing this very intellectual, thematically rich and subtext and, you know, challenging what you thought horror could be very much in the last 5-6 years. And so now anything that's below that is just gutter trash. If it's Texas Chainsaw, if it's Freddy, if it's Chucky, that's that old stuff. We're beyond that now. And then you have the other fans that grew up in that era that hold that dear, that enjoy kind of trashy horror and enjoy kind of the low-hanging fruit, and they kind of get annoyed always having to think at some of these horror films. There's a lot of us in the middle that can enjoy different variations of both, but that's the loud two groups. Is you get people that love Robert Eggers movies that watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre and they go, these characters suck. The story we've already told 7 times in this franchise. It's an hour and 15 minutes long. He's Jason Voorhees now. There's just gore. This is trash. And then you have everybody else that walk in that go, it's called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. People get massacred in Texas. That's exactly what it said it is. That's exactly what I wanted. What did you expect?
Right.
And then you get people in the middle where it's like, where I would say I firmly plant, where I'm like, look, I can very much enjoy just a straightforward, low-hanging fruit type slasher film where we're going to get in quick. It's efficient. Characters don't really matter a whole lot because we're just watching them get massacred in different ways. And as long as the villain is cool and intimidating and has a cool weapon and a cool kill, I'm mostly satisfied because that was most of my boxes checked. But at the same time, I'm somebody that gets very almost offended at this attitude that horror or slasher specifically can only be so good.
Yeah.
That's what did you expect? Like, slashes are always trash. And it's like, well, they don't have to be. You can very easily have convincing characters that we walk away really liking. You can have a villain that has layers. You can set up things narratively that have like a through line, a character arc, a theme, and still hit all those boxes of gore, of tension. They just don't typically have that.
Even it kind of related in a sense to this, but kind of with that elevated horror, it's a little bit like a stepping on the toes.
Yeah.
But like, well, we have to elevate horror because, obviously it's all trashy, it's all nonsense, but we are making important good ones.
Yes.
And that there's inherently it's condescending.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean. It's probably the language of it is probably socially conscious horror. There's probably other phrases that say it better than elevated horror.
I'm stuck on that term because of Scream.
Correct. It's the whole conversation in the movie. But it's certainly a conversation to be had about, like, is that the best way to talk about this? And then the other one that kind of happens with horror movies is you have a lot of movies that kind of bend genres and they put other elements in there. And so, Terminator, Aliens, some of my favorite movies of all time, very clearly horror elements to them. And there's this weird thing with horror where sometimes when you have those other things in there, people, it's not a horror movie.
Oh, yeah.
Or people get like way too gatekeeping, like, well, the Terminator's not a slasher. Well, what if there's a faceless killer going through the phone book, killing people based off their names alphabetically? That feels like a slasher film. Who uses a gun? Okay. But now we're getting very technical on our definition. My point when I say it's a slasher. It's not a slasher because okay, it's just like excessive gatekeeping. And then the other one of like, if a horror movie's too good, there's Silence of the Lambs. Well, I mean, that's just a great drama. It's a great thriller. So it can't be a horror film. Like, well,
Seven's another one.
Yeah, Seven. It's not a horror movie.
Pretty horrific.
And you define horror as being B movies.
Yeah. I run into that problem a lot.
And in the same time, if you ask me my favorite horror movies, I won't list Terminator. I won't list Aliens.
Yeah.
So I do that myself. And I have my reasons, my thinking, because that's not normally what people are looking for. I'm trying to give creative different answers. And so if everything is best of everything is the same, my top 10 list, I don't think that's very interesting. So I have some reasons I do that, but I think some of that is my own thinking where I play that same game. Well, it's not a horror movie, but at the same time, I would say it's a horror movie in other context. So I play some of those goofy games too. Super Chat came in from, did you have something to say about that?
Oh, just to that point, I did a top 50 action films and a top 50 horror films. And on the action franchise ranking, I had Terminator 2. And on the horror franchise ranking, I had the first Terminator. So, and a lot of that conversation and that inner turmoil does come from like, do I even want to deal with these comments? Like,
yeah. Jarrett had a super chat. It's totally internet based. I'm basically a chill moviegoer. If I don't like or like a movie, I don't have a YouTube channel or thing like that. I guess maybe I'm reading it too quickly.
I'm confused at what he's saying too.
Yeah. It's totally internet based. So the internet, so much of it is the internet drives up the polarization. Basically, a chill moviegoer. If I don't like a movie, I don't like it. If I don't like a YouTube or anything like that.
Maybe he's saying that he expresses himself on Twitter and everything because he doesn't have a channel. It's not expressing yourself. It's just it's just like the political party thing. It's either you're hard left, hard right, in the middle. Just don't even talk.
Yeah. And everything you have to, are you on this side of this team? It's like, well, there's not teams and there's no winning. We're just have different opinions. Let's talk. It's the fun part is we disagree. Billy with Super Chat. Do you guys think Saw should retcon everything after Saw 2004? I do. I would love to see the character of Adam come back. I think he has much more to give. I love Saw 2004. Hate everything else. Thoughts?
That has such a meticulously strung together story. I think that would be insulting to fans if they tried to retcon any of that.
Yeah, because the franchise continued on strong for a whole run, and it was, you kind of view all of them together, that the whole mythology of our understanding of Jigsaw, he's the character that is really the through line for all of this, because it just kept replacing everybody else. And I mean, I know other characters ran through it, but who's the name? Who's the person? It's not one of the detectives, really.
No,
it is Jigsaw. And I would say that they did make some odd choices in where they went, and
they wrote themselves into a corner. They didn't expect that this was going to turn into a 10 movie franchise. And so when they kill the guy, when they give him cancer in the first movie and they draw out his death for 2 more, and they're like, crap, now what? And ever since he left, the franchise took a huge dip.
Yeah, and they just keep trying to be creative to bring him back.
There's actually 17 different people that I have as accomplices.
But I don't think it translates the same way as a Halloween or some of these other ones. It just doesn't, because like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the second movie goes out in left field immediately. And so it was very easy to like, okay, let's rethink this. Feels different. I think Halloween with
got like 5 different timelines.
Yeah, there's so many timelines. It was always weird,
Mhm.
but there's one timeline with Saw, and that's the one that everybody watched, and that's the one that built out this mythology of the character. If you want to do it again, I think you just hard reboot it. Say, hey, 30 years later, 10 years from now, go
Mhm.
like, let's hard reboot it. But I don't think you could do one of these legacy go backs. I just don't think it's a franchise where that works.
I think
at all.
Spiral took the right approach. There was just some ingredients in the mix that didn't quite land. I mean, making Chris Rock a hard-boiled detective and the star of the movie, even though it was his idea, was like a big mistake in hindsight. The overall story of somebody taking inspiration from Jigsaw and applying it to a more modern purpose, that made sense as a reboot idea.
Yeah. And I liked, I'm not at all tied to the Saw franchise.
Neither
I
am
didn't
I.
watch any of them until I had my channel. It's an interesting binge because of the nature of how serialized it is and the layered, like movies layered on top of each other.
Mhm.
So that was just really interesting. But it's not something I care about really.
Yeah.
'Cause I had fun with this latest one, but it just when the central through line of your series is a guy you killed off a million movies ago.
Yeah.
Oops. Here's a fun one. Would you count Jurassic Park as horror?
It certainly has horror elements to it, but it's nowhere near as strong or as prominent of an element as like the argument with Terminator.
Yeah.
Terminator at its heart is horror
Yeah.
slasher throughout most of the movie with a lot of sci-fi and a lot of action.
Mm-hmm.
That is predominantly action adventure.
Yeah. And I think that's, if you look at my favorite movies, almost all of them are these crossbreeds of a bunch of different things.
Yes.
And that's probably a lot of why they were so successful. That's why they resonate with so many different people. That's why they have such broad appeal, because they take this, like my sister, my wife doesn't watch horror movies. My sister doesn't really watch horror movies either, but my wife doesn't watch horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
Jaws and Jurassic Park, top 10 movies for her.
Yeah.
Any point in time you can put those on and she'll be in the mood for it. Because it's not that she doesn't want the thrills of horror. Just straight line horror has stuff that's not for. She loves the Terminator movies.
Mm-hmm.
Straight line horror is just too much for her, and watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's just not her thing. But so as soon as you package it and you put the moments of horror
Mm-hmm.
in this story about these creatures being brought back to life and things like that, then it's in a package where she likes the thrills.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't call it a horror movie, but certainly when things start going
Horror
wild,
sequences.
Mm-hmm, definitely, and that's what you think. Spider-Man 2, there's a horror sequence in Spider-Man 2, blatantly, and
full on Sam Raimi horror. Yeah.
And if you've seen any of his Evil Dead movies, you see the Doc Ock wakes up sequence, and you know exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a horror sequence, but you would never describe Spider-Man 2 as a horror film.
Yeah.
And sometimes what makes this difficult is that, well, that's even one of the things about it. Horror, you can have a horror sequence.
Yeah.
As soon as you have sci-fi in a movie, it's a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
A drop of sci-fi means, okay, you've introduced it to this whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so certain genres even play kind of differently with the nature of them and what they mean for the story and what they are.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the most divided fandom? And it's tough because right now so many of them are like, which one is worse, DC or the Snyderverse boys or horror fans? Or
it's kind of all over right now. The one that I have the most issue with just historically is the Halloween fandom, because it's like the most extreme example of what I was talking about, where you have people that think that everything that comes out in this franchise is like absolute garbage, and no matter what they do, it's always going to be there. You have fans that very openly, but they say it openly, but they don't seem to understand the implications of saying that. They just, if it's Halloween, I'm grateful.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter how the quality is. If it's here, if we get this, I'm just going to say thank you and move on. And so anybody that tries to have a conversation in the middle tends to get attacked by one of them. I mean, I was very in the middle on both Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills, and I would get attacked from both sides. Like, you just like Chucky, anything that doesn't have Chucky, you're an idiot. And then I have the other side where it's like, how can you praise this movie? And that's the one that I get the most experience with, but that's just because that's the circles I run
right
in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like I've had the craziest conversations with DC fans,
Mm-hmm.
and on record too, like I like the DC characters more than Marvel characters.
Mm-hmm.
without question, no reservation. Obviously, I love the MCU. I love a bunch of Marvel characters. I think DC characters are better. I posted my top 10 favorite comic book movies a few years back. I think I had 3 DC movies in my top 5, and I had a bunch of comments like, "Why do you hate DC movies?"
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't have any DCEU movies in my top 10.
No.
And potentially now I would put Zack Snyder's Justice League, and there would very likely be in there. So maybe things have changed, but it's like that fandom. They just see red if they don't see any of Zack Snyder's stuff in there.
Yeah.
And there's just like a very strange thing. Like I am absolutely on Zack Snyder's side. I am absolutely a fan of his movies. You can go back to look at my 2016. I have a review of Batman v Superman. I said I liked it back then. I didn't give it a glowing review, but I said I liked it back then. Mm-hmm. The fandom certainly has a side to it that's very intense, mm-hmm. and just sees red. They just see the next battle, the next fight to get the next thing.
I've had that experience too, because like in that same note, we did a 31 on 31 where we ranked all of the Marvel mm-hmm. MCU films with all of the DCEU films, and Man of Steel was my number 1. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of Man of Steel. I'm a huge fan of DC in general. Batman's my favorite. And so I remember I did a review for Wonder Woman 84, and I have like a serial DC fanatic that comes back only when I do DC stuff, but I always recognize the screen name, and will just defend any small or medium or huge criticism I have about any DC movie. Like they're all perfect, and we've mm-hmm. just been brainwashed by the MCU to see flaws when these are all like just levitating above the rest of us. And I'm like, I'm saying Man of Steel is the greatest of all 31 of these movies. Like, who are you arguing with?
Yeah, I'm clearly not, whatever this brainwashing is you're saying, I'm not in that camp.
Yeah.
Alexander commented, Marvel is even surprisingly becoming divisive with films like Eternals. And maybe I think that might even want to be to kind of talk about another aspect of why our fandom's so divided. So mm-hmm. Eternals comes out, and I wasn't really digging the trailers. I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at here. I don't know what it's going here. And it was starting to feel awfully pretentious for a Marvel movie with the way that it was shot and the way they did. People were talking about it. And it was the first time I saw a MCU film, not Marvel, MCU film. And right out of the gate, I was like, I didn't like that.
Same.
And then, and a lot of people found that camp. Rotten Tomato score, I think, is under 50% now. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bunch of people that's in my top 5 MCU films. And like I think there's a quote from a guy from Variety or something, like one of the major outlets did this video where it's like, well, we think we have to talk about the fact that whenever a movie is directed by a woman, especially an action movie, it's judged more harshly. And so a big reason that this movie has such a low Rotten Tomatoes score is because a woman directed it. And it was like, there's just a lot of that in the conversation of adding an element that no one said that in their criticisms. No one said, I would have liked this if a man directed. Like nobody said that. The criticisms were like the storytelling was awkward. The deconstruction of heroes doesn't fit in this universe. The third act felt very odd. They set up some stuff with the deviants that didn't pay off. Like there was very specific things, but there's a group of people that are looking to label it sexist, racist, whatever isms. And then there's the other group of people that as soon as you put a woman in your movie, they're looking to like, this is just woke. And I think you have two sides that are just looking to slap a label on it. It's like, come on, guys, come on. Everything doesn't fall neatly into a narrative. Everything doesn't neatly fall into whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And so you have that game going on, and a million YouTubers on one side of that, a million YouTubers on the other side. It's like,
there's just like the story that came out where, or some tweets that came out saying that West Side Story didn't blow the doors off the box office because there's, I think it was Cuban characters, Puerto Rican characters. Okay, well, someone's going to call me racist for getting that wrong.
How dare
you? But yeah.
Well, if you haven't seen it, if you see it, then you know. But you haven't seen it.
I have not.
So
to that point, you have, of course, we're all racist. We saw that there was non-white people in the movie and chose not to go see it. It's not because it was literally when Omicron was coming back. It's a movie that has been redone, 3-4 times. Mm-hmm. It's a musical, not exactly a box office draw.
And there's like a big thing on Twitter, like, why is this movie not doing well? Why is this
not
doing
even there controversy with Ansel Elgort? Like, there's 17 different reasons.
And that's the thing of like, it's really neat and easy to just come up with a label that fits your preconceived notion of the way the world works.
Yes.
Slap a word on it. It's racism. It's woke. That's why this happened. Like, most things are more nuanced. And maybe there's a little truth to what you're saying, but there's a lot of factors. Like you said, Omicron. How many musicals have really taken off? You can give examples of Greatest Showman. You can give examples of La La Land.
Yeah.
Like, there are examples, and at the same time, there's a bunch that it's not like a genre that always lights up the box office.
Yeah.
And Greatest Showman bombed its opening weekend, and then it just found its footing in the weeks afterwards with people, with my wife, that literally went to go see it 5-6 times in the theater. She doesn't normally do that unless a musical comes out and there's not a pandemic.
Yeah.
Likewise, something like that when they're dropping much quicker on streaming, like even with West Side Story, my wife didn't want to go see because it's tragedy. Like that, how many times she watched In the Heights at home on HBO Max, a bazillion, and then they pulled it 30 days later and went, when does it come out in Blu-ray? I need to start watching it on loop again. But she wasn't interested in West Side Story because it's a tragedy. There's many reasons. And people just want to, what's the simplest answer? And when you go for the simplest answer that just fits neatly into your preconceived notions, you're being lazy.
Yeah.
It's a lazy way of thinking.
Even circling back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's a movie that there's a very loud, I'd say third of the tweets and Facebook statuses and YouTube comment calling it woke.
Yeah.
But this is one of those movies where that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Yes, there's woke characters, but that's part of the in joke. They're woke revolutionary characters that are going to this podunk abandoned town in Texas where everybody carries a gun.
Yeah.
And they get slaughtered with a chainsaw.
Yeah. Like I get sensitive about things like that. I'm like, oh my goodness. Is this movie about how Texans are dummies with guns? Like, I'm a Texan. I'm the only one I know that doesn't have a truck and doesn't own a gun.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm like, where's this going? And it's not where the movie goes at all. No. Like, it does not do that at all. And so I saw a thumbnail. I didn't watch the video, so maybe the video is more nuanced. But I saw a thumbnail from a guy who's got like 100,000 more subscribers than me, being like, this movie is anti-gun trash, a slasher that's, and maybe the video's better than the thumbnail implies. But if you watch the whole movie and think the movie's anti-gun,
the character literally picks up a gun to defeat Leatherface by the end.
Yeah,
and if anything, it's the opposite. It's embracing. See, you can save people.
Right,
with guns.
Got like, if you watch the first 15 minutes of it, you watch a clip, you could say that. If you watch the movie, it doesn't make any sense. Even the character that's criticized for being gun guy, he is not portrayed as a villain in the movie at all.
No,
and
they make you think it might be heading that way.
I guess that is a mild spoiler, but you've probably seen it by now. But mild spoilers, but like the movie. It's not that. But it's like everything has to fit neatly into something. Like I said, haven't seen the video. Maybe he's more nuanced than his take or something like that. But it's just very strange to see the way that people are looking for the easiest way to interpret things. And when you do that, when you remove all nuance, all of a sudden you're left with awesome and awful.
Yeah.
Very simplistic worldview. Daniel's gonna super chat. Speaking of Chloe Zhao, are you guys interested in checking out her upcoming Dracula movie that will be in the vein of Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man?
Never even heard of it.
I don't know what you're talking about. Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man is in the vein of Leigh Whannell because it's his movie. He's an auteur filmmaker. He writes and directs them. So the idea that hers is in the vein of that, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is she has a very distinct style that up to this point in time.
Maybe you mean grounded?
You mean grounded if you mean it's that continuity, if you mean it's from Blumhouse. But he is the reason that movie is the way that it is.
Yeah.
And she's not him. Am I excited about it? As of right now, I didn't like Nomadland and I didn't like Eternals. Those are the two movies from her I've seen. It'll be a very pretty looking it'll be a very good looking film. It will very unlikely be for me. I could be wrong. I could be won over. I try to go into every movie with a clean slate. As long as it interests me. Yeah. I'm not looking to hate on her movies or anything like that. But I watched Nomadland because I watched all the Best Picture nominees last year and I went, this isn't for me. I think I understand why people like it. I don't get it. Maybe that's my intelligence level. And then I think that there was just some issues with how she told the story of Eternals. And I think there was just also some fundamental flaws in it, that it was too much story to tell in 2 hours. Yeah. Or 2.5 hours, as it turned out to be. Any final thoughts on fandoms before we kind of move on to our next subject?
I don't think we're going to be speaking to too many people that fall into those camps, but if anybody's listening that finds themselves shaking their head yes at some of the things that we're saying that people do online. Like you're kind of ruining the fun of movies and and just fandom in general. Like part of the fun of going to see a movie and then sharing your thoughts is to bounce thoughts off of each other. It would be incredibly boring if every YouTuber came on and said the exact same things, pro and con, about everything. Like that's part of the fun of talking with all of you guys. Part of the fun of what we do, why we do what we do, is so that you can see a movie like Texas Chainsaw, give your thoughts, and then hear other people's thoughts and talk about it and discuss it. So when it turns into just like flame wars and I'm wrong or I'm right, you're wrong, don't want to hear it, like that just kind of destroys the entire point. So that's kind of my final thought, is like there's nothing good that can come from that aside from self validation, I guess. I don't know.
People throwing in the chat, doesn't Kanto count? First off, Encanto didn't blow up the box office.
No.
It blew up on streaming.
It blew up on the radio.
And it blew up on the radio after it took off on streaming.
Yeah.
A month after it hit theaters, it came out on Disney Plus, and that dramatically changed the game for it. And you could argue a number of things about that, but Disney's a totally different thing, I would say, than like West Side Story is a musical for adults. Everyone with a kid under the age of 10 has heard the Encanto soundtrack on loop for 2 months now. Like I show up at his house and his 5-year-old randomly breaks into Under Pressure or We Don't Talk About Bruno. She was sitting at the dinner table and she just starts shouting those.
Yeah.
Which might have seemed odd to me, except that's what happens at my house with my wife breaking into those songs, as well as all 3 of my kids. And then our 3-year-old's like, mommy movie, which is Encanto because it's a musical. So my wife always wants to watch it, but the other 2 want to watch it too. So everyone except me puts on that movie all the time. So I've seen it a million times. But Disney's a little bit of a different. They're a different. It's like it's not. When I make statements about musicals, musicals for families versus musicals for adults. And In the Heights also. I also mentioned In the Heights. In the Heights didn't light up the box office. Also underperformed.
Encanto is actually kind of a nice transition into the next topic that we're going to talk about with the mid budgets and stuff like that. So
let's use that one. Throw a question up here, and then we'll start talking about that.
Yes.
Next subject, over on the Twitter, I asked some people if they had any topics that they wanted us to talk about, and Bat of Gotham said, "Is there even a market for mid-budgeted films post-pandemic?"
Did you hear that there's a Batman movie coming out in a week? Actually, 2 weeks. I'm sorry. I don't want to excite you too much.
People keep asking me, am I excited for the Batman? As it turns out, yes.
Yeah.
So that little small movie. But the question is, it's all the other stuff that's not the blockbusters.
Yeah.
All the things that aren't comic book movies, that aren't adaptations of sci-fi projects, that aren't reboot quills. Is there a place for mid-budget films post-COVID?
Well, kind of tying into that, which is why I thought Encanto was a nice transition. Do you think that classic Disney animated film, maybe even Pixar, that's not Toy Story or some huge property, do you think that those have a place in the theaters anymore? Because just that example right there, where it's in theaters, the motivation for taking the family to the theaters is 1, to get out, but 2, because kids are clamoring to go, and you're talking about $70, $80. And if you know that the movie's going to be coming out and streaming with Disney Plus within a month, and kids don't really know release dates that well, do you think that's going to be a motivation anymore? Or do you think families, parents, for the most part, are going to be like, we're watching it at home?
I think Encanto kind of shows you everything about the answer to that. And then I watched a chart of the top movies streamed from 2021. Animated movie.
Because they're on repeat. Adults watch movies maybe twice,
and kids watch them forever. So I think at the core of the question, I think COVID sped up what was already happening, which is to say people are less and less likely to go to theaters. People have been talking about that forever. So theaters have been trying to figure out what's the right gimmick to get more people to show up. So a decade ago, or in the Avatar era, it was let's do 3D. Avatar made $1 bazillion. It was worth seeing with the surcharge for 3D. Let's do 3D movies. And so then they did all these crappy conversions of everything instead of doing the hard work of making a great cinematic experience. And then a big one of the last decade was also, let's reconvert our theaters into recliners, give you a little table, do the Alamo Draft House model. Let's have a waiter come out to your seat. let's have full service meals. So they keep trying to find a way to upgrade the experience. I think at the core of it is that people are just more discerning about what they want to go and pay money to see in a theater. And certain things have a theatrical experience. You make a Spider-Man movie and you convince everyone that maybe we're going to see a couple Spider-Men. Everyone wants to experience that with other people.
Yes.
And you want to see it on the biggest screen. And there's a big discussion after No Way Home came out about crowd behavior. Because they were acting like they were at a rock concert or a sporting event, just hooting and hollering.
Even Endgame.
That
was the most amazing theater experience I've ever had, because that last 45 minutes to an hour, like a sporting event, like you said, catches Mjolnir, like the whole theater. And normally you'd be like, shut up, like any other movie, but you're jumping up too. And it gives you an experience you'll have the rest of your life, to where there's videos of cell phone videos of reactions, and they get millions of views because people want to relive how 300 people reacted to that.
And there's people like, I had some people like, do you think etiquette at the movies has gone out the window? Like, no, because that only happened with 2 movies in the last 3 years. And those were event films. And that's what people want. They want to go to the movies and have something that they can't have in their living room. And mid-budget films, by definition, they're not the things that create this big, gigantic spectacle. If they thought it was going to be this big event, they would have given it a bigger budget. And more people are just going to sit at home, wait for it to show up on streaming. And then the other problem with it is that so many TV shows are so good, and they play differently. So television prior to the year 2000 was all episodic. Almost all of it was episodic because there was no way to go and restart at the beginning. There was a few shows that were on VHS. Otherwise, you just have to wait 3 months until maybe the episode starts over. So it was all episodic. And then with the introduction of DVD sets, and you start having more like HBO, and they could program and decide when they played episodes of Sopranos and things like that. And it was structured much better. And suddenly you have serialized television, and the era of prestige television emerges. And back in the day, it was frowned upon for movie stars to show up on TV shows. Suddenly you get things like The Sopranos, and then The Wire, and The Shield, and Breaking Bad. That's just fantastic drama, better than most of the movies coming out. Suddenly, there's no divide. Movie stars go back and forth, no thought about it. And you can get a great drama that's more involved because it's 10 hours long at home every single week. And so the market, I can get it for free at my house, or $15 to get HBO, or we pay $30 for me and my wife to see a 2-hour drama. Well, I'm just going to get HBO. And I think how good television has been has just pushed mid-budget movies out of the way. What you can do with special effects now, even these CW shows have a Superman show where he's flying all around now. And you can have spectacle on the CW of all networks.
I mean, there was argument for a while there that the King Shark version we got in Flash looked better than the James Gunn version.
And you think that it's kind of crazy, the concept of how good television has gotten. And so I think that was always happening. COVID just sped it up. Because we spent 2 years at home, and we were able to watch all this stuff on Netflix, and then all the good TV shows were dropping on Netflix, and all the TV shows were still dropping. And is the stuff in theaters, and you went, I don't need that. Until No Way Home. And suddenly you need it again because it's unique. It's an actual experience.
They're going to have to find a happy medium, because studios have been pushing for years to try to find little ways to try to keep more of the pie. Not that theaters get a very big piece of it in the first place, but COVID sped that entire thing up. You have experiments like HBO Max saying every movie that you can see in theaters for the year of 2021, you'll be able to watch at home the exact moment it drops in theaters. And then what happened? I mean, we don't know all the numbers, but the box office tanked for pretty much every single one of those movies. I don't know if they made up for it in the back end with HBO Max. They might not even know that yet, but we're going to get to a point where you're going to have subscription services to see certain movies, and mid-budget movies are going to be the ones that are probably going to be the first casualty for the theater experience, where they're going to want movies like No Way Home, movies like Mission Impossible 7 and 8, movies like Top Gun Maverick to kind of be the pocket liners, the ones that, okay, we exploded, we made $3 billion with this one movie this year. Now we can afford to have all these other $7 million movies that just go right to streaming.
Yeah. And kind of tying back to what you said at the beginning about these animated films. So you start to realize if their goal is to get their $5-10 from my family every month, as soon as you have these, you only can have it on Disney Plus. You have my family hooked.
Yeah.
And you have enough of these new things coming in, you have us.
Yeah. I mean, I literally said on a live stream maybe 2 weeks ago, we were talking about different streaming services. Somebody had asked me in a Q&A, and I was talking about the ones that I have. And I literally said out loud, like, yeah, Paramount Plus, I haven't used that in a while. I probably need to delete that. Thanks for reminding me. And then 7 comments later, no, wait, Halo's coming out. And I'm like, yeah, you're right now. I can't delete it.
Yeah. And finding those things to hook you and just the right thing. And yeah, I think that's the future of all of this. And I hope like it's going to hurt theaters in one sense. And I think production companies are getting the wrong idea, and they're frequently misinterpreting what's kind of happening as they usually do. Like, we just need more sequels. We need more of this. Like, no, you need more movies that justify going to the theater. And Tenet's a little bit tricky one because it was the first release after lockdowns and everything was canceled. But like Nolan could tell original stories and get people to show up because you knew he would do something interesting and have spectacle, and it was one you'd want to see on the big screen. And then they keep thinking like, well, if we just turn everything up on spectacle, like, no, you have to do something interesting. An actual cinematic experience is what you need to do, and they're not doing enough of that.
And I had a talk with a friend of mine back whenever all this kind of started about when you were getting a lot of reports about like, our theaters dead. Like as soon as they announced HBO Max, there was a lot of stories. Theaters are done. That's it. That was the final nail in the coffin. Just watch. By the end of 2021, they're all going to close their doors. Obviously, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think they need to do. I would like it as somebody that likes physical media, and even somebody that's starting to really appreciate digital media. They need to find a way to kind of wrap the two into one. Spider-Man No Way Home comes out. You can pay a premium price, maybe $10 more than a regular ticket or $5 more. Go see the movie, and then you get a digital code in the email.
Yeah.
And you can go home and watch it immediately. Or you can spend $30 at home to have it. Like, something like that. Somewhere to kind of bridge the gap, give it motivation for those that want to stay at home to go to the movie to get the best of both worlds. There's some conversations or some ideas that I think that need to be had to explore how to gain people to motivate them to go to the theaters.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's been a bit strange, even with this kind of COVID situation, is how the lack of creativity on the part of these studios of coming up with interesting ways to get people to show up.
Yeah.
When you have theater, you have streaming, you have Blu-rays. There's definitely some ways that you could package this that would add value.
Yeah.
And you could charge more because people know I get a movie ticket and I get a Blu-ray. I get a movie ticket, I get to, but they haven't done any of that.
I mean, it's similar to what Vudu did for a long time, which you kind of let me in on. Because the reason I never bought digital copies for a long time is because eventually I know I'm going to have it on that shelf, and I don't want to buy it twice.
Right.
And so Vudu said, okay, pre-order it through Walmart, Vudu. We'll send you the Blu-ray when the Blu-ray comes out, and you can watch the digital copy immediately. And there's like a premium price that kind of bridges the gap for that. I think that model could work to have streaming and theaters kind of in one transaction.
Right. And they stopped doing that. That's the weird thing. It's like you stop doing the thing that is a good product. Like I bought more Blu-rays and digital from you when you were doing that.
Yeah.
And I bought them from you as opposed to the store. If you stop offering this service, then very odd. Quick question. We'll move on to our next topic on here. Play by pace. Do you think Joker will be teased cameo in the Batman? I hope not. I don't want Joker teased just yet. I don't think there's reason to tease Joker just yet. There's some rumors, speculation, leaks, and stuff. I don't always put a lot of stock into that, but there's reason to think that there will be something. I don't want that. If it's just a tease, I don't mind too much. But even the fact that Batman Begins ends with a tease for the Joker, as soon as you in this movie tease the Joker in it, you're derivative of what Nolan did, and that's not a useful comparison. You don't want to draw comparison in that sense. So I don't want them to. I want a Joker in this continuity, assuming it's good. But I don't want it now.
I think it's a 65% chance that it's going to happen. I think that feels like something a studio would mandate. Like, okay, we're going to give you carte blanche, but at some point in the movie, you got to have somebody with a creepy smile or just something like that. But I actually hope that, provided this movie's great, which I have all the faith in the world that it will be, I actually hope we don't even start to approach Joker until the third film. Because this whole thing has already been said that we're doing villain origins. We're going to get Catwoman. We're going to get a little Penguin. We're getting Riddler. God knows what other characters are going to show up that aren't even been in the marketing. And so I think that there's a way to do this movie, knock it out of the park, set your new Batman universe, do a sequel with some other underutilized villains, and tease Joker in that one. We don't need Joker in the second movie. You know,
right.
They needed that in the Nolan because he just proved we can do comic book movies right. Now we're going to knock it out of the park with the best villain.
Yeah.
You don't need to do that. I mean, we've had how many Joker variations since Heath Ledger? 3, if you count TV. 4.
TV gets even more real complicated.
Yeah,
but you did cinema. 2, both of them in movies that made a lot of money. Suicide Squad wasn't well received. It made a lot of money because Joker was in it. Okay, moving on to our final scheduled topic for the day. Over on Twitter, I asked for people's topics to discuss. Horsebox movie film reviews. What do you feel has been lost in the art of filmmaking with the advancement of technology? For example, practical effects and the actual set design going away for the most part. When a cafe in Black Widow is CGI, you know you're going in the wrong direction. So you know the person asking the questions take on it. So what are we losing in movies with the overabundance of CGI, green screen, and what technology is able to do?
Speaking strictly as the horror guy in this conversation, one of my biggest pet peeves is CGI gore. And we were talking about Texas Chainsaw. That was one of my negatives with the movie. As you could tell, a lot of the effects in that movie were digital. And I always hold the thing as like kind of the Bible. Like that's what practical effects can do. Even decades later, this is still the crown jewel because we made all of this out of silicone, out of corn syrup, out of plastic. And I think it's certainly stunted creativity a bit. Back when you had, if you hand somebody $10 million and says, make an effective monster movie with that, they had to get creative. How are we going to make this monster design? How are we going to do this? How are we going to get this effect? Nowadays, you just plug it into a computer, and the lower the budget, the worse it looks. But we're still going to use computer because it's going to be cheaper.
Yeah, it's a really tough question because you only notice effects when they're bad.
Yeah.
So if you ask me, hey, does this diner scene in Black Widow feel off? I would say no.
That was news to me.
Yeah, I didn't know that till I read it. And for all I know, you're lying.
Yeah.
Because never once in any diner scene in Black Widow did I think that looks off. Likewise, in Endgame, their time travel suits, that's all CGI. They hadn't designed it. So they're just wearing mocap suits. And you watch the trailers, you watch the movie, you would never think those people they're acting weird around each other. They're looking weird. You never think any of that.
Or even the de-aging thing that's become very popular. We need this character to be in this movie, but now they're 40 years older. And there's some good examples, but there's also way more examples where like they look really shiny.
Yeah.
And then you look at something like Halloween Kills where you're like, that looks just like Donald Pleasance. And you find out it actually was prosthetic on an actor. There you go.
Yeah. And it's tough because you only notice when it's bad.
Yeah.
And you don't notice when it's good.
And there's a million examples like No Way Home. That movie's impossible without today's advancement. Yeah. And you look back at effects like Mummy Returns or something like that, the bad examples, or even the early 2000s where they started to figure out CGI and thought it was more farther along than it actually was. And now you can literally make an entire movie like Lion King that's pretty much all CGI or Jungle Book.
So 2003, Matrix Reloaded.
Yeah.
When
video game.
It was so groundbreaking at the time what they were doing. But even at the time, we're like, wow, I can't believe you're able to do this. It doesn't look quite right. You watch Matrix Reloaded in 4K and Neo starts spinning around and it's cutting between Keanu Reeves on set and then the other one. And you just see the layer of texture, clarity, detail on his clothing just disappears and it doesn't flow quite right. And so it's not really a new problem. I think it's a matter of there's filmmakers that are just they have the budget to do it right, and they have the discipline to spend the time on it.
Yeah.
I interviewed the director of Angel Has Fallen, and he was a stuntman. And so I asked him, like, man, the explosions in the scene where the president is attacked, those look really good. Like, how did you do that? He goes, well, we blew everything up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, oh, wow. Like, there was no, like, yeah, I mean, maybe a little CGI touch up, but no, like, on set, that's what it looked like. We blew everything up. And so when you blow something up, you feel the heat and you react different when there's a fire next to you and you see everything move around.
Yeah.
And like, well, why don't more movies do this? And he goes, well, because most directors are lazy, and it's not that they're disciplined at something else, but they're not concerned about the action. I come from making action, like being the guy in it. And so that's what I care about. You know, like Die Hard, his dad apparently was in one of the helicopters that flew, the FBI helicopters that flew through LA up to the tower. His dad flew that. Mm-hmm. And he's like, that's like, you feel like you're in the city of LA because you're in the city of LA.
Yeah.
And you just lose so much of that. Mm-hmm. Even back to video game movies, you watch Uncharted, and as exciting and fun as it is, you never once are like, yeah, Tom Holland, man, he was dangling from a plane. Like, you always are so aware you're watching an effect.
Yeah.
The whole time. And it's not like overtly horrible most of the time. It's just, you know, it's not real. When you watch Cliffhanger and there's a guy dangling he goes between two planes. It was the most expensive stunt of all time because they paid this guy $1 million to go from one plane to the other, chained together. It was extraordinarily dangerous. Mm-hmm. And you watch this 30-year-old movie and you go, that's a guy.
Yeah. Or Tom Cruise dangling out of that building in the 4th Mission Impossible.
Like, it's real.
Mm-hmm.
You never once believed that Tom Holland was doing any of that stuff. And he's very physical. He's very active, involved in the stunts and everything.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't on a pirate ship in the air.
Yeah.
I don't know if they used any helicopters to do any of that stuff.
Yeah. And a very, very small example of that, which is why I was saying on the laziness and the lack of creativity thing, like, how many times have you wanted to do a thumbnail and said, okay, I can either go get this prop that I need, or I can literally Google a transparent one and just erase my fingers. You know how many times I've done that? I could have it in my house. Be like, I can go downstairs and get my mini sledge, or I can just Google it. And I've done the easier one because it's like, well, practical. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And so you extrapolate that by, do we need to buy dynamite and blow up a city block, or should we just film the city block and put fire behind it? And
the other one to add into it, not to get kind of heavy, but the whole Alec Baldwin situation. I don't want to get into the controversy of all of that, but I guess it was the director of photography was killed by Alec Baldwin pulling a trigger on a gun. And there's a series of reasons, mistakes, whatever led to that moment happening. Mm-hmm. And you go, no one should die making a movie. Obviously, in any line of work, there's always dangers and things like that. But you're talking about making movies where you can have a prop, a prop gun right here. Yeah. Like, you can use this right here, and then just in post add little poo. You can get like a little air gun that just shoots, so it even kicks a little bit in your hand, and then in post add little gun muscle flares and stuff, or you can blow stuff up and fire real guns. And back to this stuntman. His take on it was he was never around when people died, so he did all this crazy, dangerous stuff. Like, you just do it safely, you do it responsibly. Well, there's certainly an argument to be had about the benefits for the safety of the crew. Yeah, to not blow things up and not have gunpowder weapons on set.
Always the danger of the element of human error.
Mm-hmm. And then when you throw budget into it, if you're the guy that's worked on a big blockbusters, they've got a lot of protocols in place. You have the budget to do it right. Whereas this Alec Baldwin film, it's like this low budget little Western where you're cutting a lot of corners to get everything done. And I'm not chiming in at all. And when I say cutting corners, that is not me making any sort of low budget means you just don't have as much money to have as many staff to make sure everything is done properly. More people have multiple roles. Alec Baldwin was a producer on this film. And when that happens, you just increase the danger of what can happen.
Yeah.
So I think I love practical. I want more practical.
there's a time and a place for both. I just wish that there was a lot more times where there's an obvious benefit to practical that I wish they wouldn't cheap out on it. And it's predominantly in horror. Like that's just kind of where my wheelhouse is. I would rather see a prosthetic jaw hanging than to look at the guy that gets his face cut and go, that's fake.
Yeah.
It doesn't even move right. Yeah.
I think Jurassic Park's one of the classic examples of doing it right.
Yes.
Where they use multiple techniques depending on the shot seamlessly. You don't know which one is which as you're watching the film. They chose shots that covered up what didn't work. Nighttime, raining, all of a sudden it covers up the fact that that's a rubber leg. It covers up that that's CGI that's not very detailed.
Yeah.
And so you just intelligently combined all the techniques. You think, like, what if they had done this Uncharted and you weren't really sure what was real and what wasn't? Because you watch that movie, not one of those frames is a stunt man behind a plane.
Yeah.
Not one of them. Not one of them is a helicopter flying a pirate ship. Not one of them. Every single one of them is on a green screen or CGI, in which case there's always that gap because you know what you're seeing. And then there's movies where you watch it and you're just not really even sure what techniques are being used.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that was really cool what you did there. And that was convincing.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park is almost 30 years old. And still most people say that it looks better than the new movies where they used both CGI as well as they do have props. Like you can see behind the scenes, they used actual things, but there wasn't this fear of like, this isn't going to look real. So how do we need to make it look real and have true movie magic?
Yeah.
There's great special effects in Uncharted, but it's not movie magic that absorbs you.
Correct.
All right, we had some questions come in. Dale, would you guys be interested in a live action Clayface or a new Mr. Freeze? I think we talked about this yesterday. It's tough to know what the tone exactly of this movie is and how grounded, how comic booky. Generally speaking, I think both of them have a lot of room to be very good characters. Live action. You watch Heart of Ice from Batman the Animated Series. There's a great story from Mr. Freeze that's a tragedy, a great villain. How do you pull it off in live action? That's always the question, and have it be believable.
Yeah. I think that there's going back to creativity, there's a way to bridge the gap between the fantastical side. More so with Mr. Freeze, I would say Clayface is pretty hard, but there's a way to bridge the gap between the fantastical side of those characters and the very grounded stories and character development that they have. And I think Matt Reeves, we talked about it yesterday, even announced, they were like, they always do, what's your ideas for a sequel? And he's like, I'd like to do like a grounded take on Mr. Freeze. Well, I want that. Like, that's a great villain where the only picture we ever get is cartoon Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah. And you've seen what he's done with the Riddler. He's made the Zodiac Killer in a Batman movie. So I want to take that approach to a Mr. Freeze. Clayface would have been awesome with like Ben Affleck Batman, where there's very much that fantastical alien stuff going on, and you would never blink twice. I don't think you're going to see Clayface against Pattinson. Yeah. Unless it's a wildly different interpretation of the character.
And that's so much the key. With Batman, you can have this very grounded version of it, and then you have him in space. Yeah. He's a very versatile character. We need to find out which one we have here. And the trailers present it as like hyper real, but grounded. You don't have full on sci-fi. So that it makes it a little difficult to see how you do Clayface, but we'll see. This is also Matt Reeves. This is a guy that turned, not by himself, but Talking Ape, one of the great characters of the decade. So he has the ability to bridge that gap and take silly things very seriously.
And we've seen from the Nolan trilogy, you can do that. I mean, you can have Bane that's not this huge cartoon, like I suddenly grew like the Hulk. You can just have, it's a pain medication, but he's already a muscular guy. Or even Ra's al Ghul. He's a guy that has this ninja cult that dips into this ancient ooze and comes out revitalized. Or it could just be a guy that has now been immortalized because of his bloodline. Yeah. And you can interpret the themes of it differently.
Dorian, Willem Dafoe as Joker. I mean, I think he's too old now. I think there's pretty obvious.
The most obvious casting that never happened.
Yeah, it's right. That's a great way to put it. It's the most obvious casting that never happened. He's too old now, and when you see him as Green Goblin, you can immediately see how he'd be fantastic. At the same time, that's the exact reason why you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then you could do this alternate timeline if you would. What we know now, back in 1989, potentially he would have been fantastic instead of Jack Nicholson. Which that's not a statement about Jack Nicholson. That's just to say Willem Dafoe has such a great crazy face.
Yeah.
And he's even made some comments about that of like, it's a weird compliment. You know, people tell me all the time that I am so convincing as a crazy person, as a psycho killer. Like, thank you, but what are you saying right now? He said it much better, funnier than me, but I don't think it'll ever happen. I don't think it should happen at this point. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, of course, in an alternate world, that he would have been fantastic in the part. Syrian O'Shea, I definitely don't know how to pronounce your name. I apologize for that. If you guys could go back in time, in a time machine, okay, so it has to be a time machine, not like a time portal or some other sort of event that sends you back in time. In a time machine, to watch any premiere, what movie would it be? Love from Ireland. Time machine, not a portal. You know, it's some of it. It's I'm not going to go with the what movie would I want to relive, because Endgame, No Way Home, amazing experiences that would be cool to be able to re-experience more. So I'm thinking more. Let's go back in time to classic movie I wasn't there for when it happened. I would think for me probably Star Wars 1977, when the crowds are just going bananas for this brand new thing. Like, what is this that launched what has become this multi-billion-dollar empire that is still, now it's dividing fans, but it was making new fans for 45 years now. I think that one for me, pretty easy, safe to like be a part of that original Star Wars mania.
That's a hard one for me to answer, because like part of me would say things like Nightmare on Elm Street, or like one of my favorite movies of all time, just to go back and experience it with a crowd that's never heard of, that doesn't know anything that's going to happen. At the other side of the thing, I would almost be morbidly curious to go and watch something that maybe I'm not as big of a fan of, like The Exorcist or Psycho, like something that historically had these monumental reactions from audience members that's hard to imagine in 2020,
right?
2022. So it would be one of those. I don't know. The sick pleasure of going back and watching people vomit at everything that Regan does in that movie. Reagan, whatever her name is. I always get corrected. Or going back and experiencing an audience being introduced to Freddy Krueger for the first time.
Right.
Or even Terminator 2 or something like that, where it's just like, wow, what did you do from the first film?
So for a few minutes, we'll just take some of your questions, and then we'll close on out. So if you guys want to throw some questions or super chats into the comment section, we'll take those for only about 10 minutes. We're not going to go a long time. This guy's got to go finish making barbecue, and I'm going to watch him do that, because I don't know how to do that, but I will enjoy it when it happens. So here's one of the straightforward ones that you see immediately. Swifty the Gamer, are you guys excited for the Obi-Wan series? I think we're kind of in the same ballpark on this, of like, I'm pretty frustrated that they keep going to the same time period, same set of characters. They have the Star Wars universe, and instead of going bigger and new times, new places, new stories, we keep checking in on the same characters. And I think one of the few exceptions where I don't immediately kind of like, why are we doing this, is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah,
because he is such a compelling, great character. You do still have Ewan McGregor. Of all the things in the prequels that people are like, that didn't go well, no one points the finger at Ewan McGregor.
Yeah,
he's still top of the world, top of movie stardom. He seemed totally game to do it, in which case it just seems like primed opportunity to do something interesting. And it's also it's more compelling than most of these other ones. Like, what was he up to for those 20 years? Like, what was going on there? So I naturally, I think it lent himself. So I'm very excited for it for all those reasons of the prequel. Let's catch up with someone. I think this is, you go back like 5 years, I think this is the one that I've always said is the one that I would be most interested in.
Every single thing that you just said, basically. Yeah, it's the only. I'm even more frustrated with you, because you're still keeping up with all the stuff. You've watched Boba Fett, you've watched Mandalorian season 2, and I haven't watched anything since the first season of Mandalorian, because I'm just like, I want to see more. I want to see Knights of the Old Republic. I want to see something different. I don't want to keep checking in on what's going on with Jabba the Hutt. Let's do a series on that. And it's just like Obi-Wan is the one exception where just built into the movie's lore, even though we've had now 3 trilogies, there's that one time period where there's just nothing but questions. And even the added novelty that Hayden Christensen is going to return as Darth Vader to some effect, I want to believe in the redemption story of that. Because while I think he's a really good actor, he's, on the flip side of what you said, one of the most maligned things about those prequels. I think a lot of it's the fact that the script, it's not really his fault, but he...
And the director.
Yes.
George Lucas is a visionary.
Yeah, he does not direct
world
actors.
Class, and everyone has always said that. He is not an actor's director.
Yeah, exactly. And so
or a writer of dialogue, which he decided to do anyway.
Send. So yeah, I want to see him come back as Darth Vader and do something awesome that just like, it's almost like the fandom is ready for that. They're ready to be like, see, there you go. There's your swan song.
Here's a question. It's kind of capping out, giving a definitive answer, and I think we would have the same answer. Which do you guys prefer, CGI or practical effects, or do you think a good balance between both? I think we'd both say doing it right, balancing what, like, as everything you can do practical, you should.
Yeah.
And then CGI can do incredible things to enhance it beyond that. But the blend of the two, where you're not sure exactly how they're doing it, and when you don't know what they're doing, like in Endgame, it's tough to criticize Endgame for making their suits out of CGI when nobody noticed.
Yeah.
And we're criticized Black Widow for having a diner scene that wasn't when you didn't notice.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of what can you do with excellent. And I think all things equal, practical is better, because for the performer,
it ages better too.
It ages better, and they're looking at something, and it's tangible, so immediately your brain sees a real thing.
Yeah.
At the same time, some of the stuff that Robert Downey Jr. said was, you put me in a 100-pound Iron Man suit and ask me to act, I can only do so many takes before you're not getting top quality Robert Downey Jr. So put me in a mocap suit and you get a better performance from me. And you start balancing, like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I thought about how weird the performances were in the prequels, because George Lucas was like, yeah, everything's on the green screen. So no one knew what they were looking at, what anything. So just and people weren't even together. It was disjointed. And you think, but when you do it right, sometimes putting them in a mocap suit means they can give a better performance, because they can actually move and act rather than be like in a metal suit.
From movie to movie, from genre to genre, it's different. For most slasher movies or most horror movies, I think practical is obviously the answer to go. I would not want to be in charge of an Iron Man movie where they told me to not use CGI.
Right.
And on the flip side of that, you have something like Matt Reeves' Planet of the Apes. You could very easily take that same exact movie and try to design some kind of a monkey suit. I don't even want to know what that would look like, but you have a completely CGI person where there's this huge human performance through it, and that's where you find the mix of both.
Yeah, right. And mix is always going to be my answer. Yeah, and I think so many horror movies from the 80s where they started getting really good at the practical, and it was a Tom Savini. I always mispronounce his name, and he just these nasty things that he could come up with. And on the one hand, you're looking at latex being stretched and torn, but the effect is a lot more effective than CGI gore, because like you're seeing something tangible, and it's unsettling to see flesh tear, even if you know it's latex. Yeah. So mix, blend, movie magic. Recent news: Shane Black and Robert Downey Jr. are doing a movie together for Amazon Prime. You guys will check it out and do a Shane Black rank. Will you guys check it out and do a Shane Black ranking? I mean, will we check it out? I mean, that's, you know the answer to that. Almost certainly we would check out a Shane Black movie starring Robert Downey Jr. Will I do a Shane Black movie ranking? I don't know. I'd have to look at it. The director rankings are very hit or miss. I kind of try and read the room a little bit. Sometimes about how busy I am. I really wanted to do a Matthew Vaughn ranking when The Kingsman came out, but that movie came out. It did not make a splash. And there was this other thing out called Spider-Man No Way Home. Made a little bit of a splash. So legitimately, if I decided to spend a day making Matthew Reeves ranking versus Spider-Man ranking, that would be a very foolish financial decision for me. So it's just a matter of timing that they released it at a time where it would just, no one cared about it, too late, and just got totally blown away by everything else coming out.
I'm a gigantic Shane Black fan, and of course a gigantic Robert Downey Jr. fan, and the movie that they made together previously was great. But Shane Black also historically just does not really light up the box office. I mean, like he made The Nice Guys, which I think everybody that saw that movie is like, why has that not had a sequel? That was amazing, and nobody saw it. No. And so I think if you, especially throwing it on Amazon Prime, it's going to make even less of a splash unless it's just this mind-blowing, amazing action comedy or something. So would I watch a Shane Black ranking from myself or from Sean? Absolutely, but I don't know how many people belong to that. So kind of the same answer.
Okay, we'll try and answer these ones a little bit quicker. Shake and bake. Thoughts on the new Predator movie being rated PG-13? If that's been definitively announced, I think that's just like a terrible misread of the room. Even going to streaming, having a smaller budget, you do that so that you can do an R-rated film. You do PG-13 because you're trying to make as broad of appeal film as you can, and for theaters. And Predator doesn't like skinning people, ripping heads off, ripping spines out. That's what it is. So if it is PG-13, it's just a terrible, that feels like an executive being like, yeah, but more people can watch it. But the reason you want to do a Predator movie is because it's an IP with a built-in audience. A built-in audience of people over the age of 30, not 17-year-olds. I understand 17-year-olds like it. As a good parent, I've shown my son Predator. He loves Predator. I can't wait till I let him watch Predator 2. Like I understand there are people, but as for that, who's the built-in audience that you're choosing to do this for? It's not for the PG-13 crowd.
I mean, what's the biggest criticism of AVP?
PG-13.
That is PG-13, and then they tried to overcorrect in the second one by killing pregnant women. And so it's I don't know how recent this is or if it was just announced. I looked up Wikipedia, and the only thing that they have is says, despite being conceived as having an R rating, Davis, who I assume is the director, said that the film could potentially be cut to pass for a PG-13 rating, and that was something that was in a news article in July. So I think it defeats the whole point of putting it on streaming.
Right.
That's the whole point. There's not going to be less people watching it on streaming because it's rated R.
Right. In particular on streaming.
Yeah.
Like who's the 14-year-old kid that's into Predator that
wants to tone down a bit.
Yeah. Like mom went to bed. He's going to watch that R-rated Predator movie.
Yeah.
1534 with super chat. Thank you so much. This one is for you, of course. Yes. What would you like to see in the new Star Trek movie?
We talked about this a little bit yesterday on the Q&A. Like I don't even know how to say I'm a casual Star Trek fan. I grew up watching the Next Generation movies with my dad. I've seen Wrath of Khan, and that is the only original series Star Trek movie I've seen. And I've watched no TV episodes whatsoever that I can remember, maybe as a kid. But I love the J.J. Abrams 3 movies. That's something that's a little bit more for me. I might make some Star Trek fans vomit. Yeah. The fact that I almost misspoke there made them vomit twice. Correct. But what would I like to see in the new movie? I loved that original idea that got kind of squashed before, where Chris Hemsworth was going to come back. Yeah. That to me still sounded like a blockbuster in the making. They couldn't get the contracts right, or they realized that all these people are huge movie stars now. We can't afford it. Whatever the problem was, now that we've confirmed we're getting the original cast back, minus Anton Shelkin, obviously, but that was all I wanted. That sounded awesome. Yeah.
If you know what he's referring to, the first 10 minutes of Star Trek 2009 is basically a prologue to Captain Kirk's story. And the star of it is Captain Kirk's dad, played by Chris Hemsworth, before he was Thor, before he was in Cabin in the Woods. So pre-movie star, like right before he became a movie star, he starred in this 10-minute Star Trek mini film at the beginning of Star Trek 2009. And so then back whenever the last one came out, they said, hey, we're going to do a story and we're going to bring him back. Seems like they've abandoned that. But there's something interesting in that of like when you by freak chance cast one of the biggest movie stars of the decade right before he's that, and then you try and do something with it. There's something interesting to that. Yeah. What do I want to see? I'm the lifelong Star Trek fan. And I think they've made J.J. Abrams blockbusters with this trilogy of movies, but they haven't done a good Star Trek story. And that's that you kind of write yourself and put yourself in a tricky corner because you get a whole new audience of people that like expect J.J. Abrams roller coaster, move all around the story, turn Captain Kirk into Maverick from Top Gun, do all this stuff that like, that's not really who Captain Kirk was. That's not really what Star Trek has been. And then you, even what we divide, like why are fandoms divided? Someone it's stuff like this of like, when you make this big budget, like we're finally going to do a gigantic budget Star Trek movie, and then we're going to make a whole new audience with it. and do some stuff that really alienates the classic fans by doing it. So I hope they can find a way to balance that energy, that experience that the J.J. Abrams Bad Robot Productions bring. I like that, but I want it to also get back to the core of exploration, going to these planets and doing that properly, not just the roller coaster ride.
Yeah. I want it to feel a little bit like its own thing too, which it felt like at first. The third one, while I enjoyed it, it felt very Fast and Furious influenced.
Yeah.
And so I don't want them to just like, okay, let's do John Wick because that's the big thing now, or something like that.
And there's even some strange things. Like when you watch the trailer and Beastie Boys in there, you're doing sabotage.
And you're doing motorcycle stunts.
And motorcycle stunts. And it's like, this is obviously not Star Trek.
Yeah.
You're trading in what is unique about this franchise for what every other blockbuster is doing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a way to phrase it. I don't mind if you have the energy, the fast pace, and the jokes, but don't trade what makes Star Trek to deliver those.
And I think they need to have an awesome villain too, because I think Eric Bana was very good in the first film, but he's not like a standout villain.
Yeah.
They obviously kind of messed up the new Khan a little bit. I think his performance was awesome, but there's just fundamental problems with that storyline.
Right. And they had the bad idea of like, let's keep it a secret.
Yeah, let's try to act like it's not him. And then you get to this, well, yeah, duh.
And you design the movie around a twist reveal, and it's just like, man, you guys really you read that wrong.
Yeah. I want to see, I've always liked the Klingons. I want to see like a Klingon movie. You got to see him for a snippet in the second movie.
Right. And that's probably a good call of like, that's the thing out there of like, you want to do like big, all out, interesting action based Star Trek. You got the Klingons out there, do a Klingon story. Data's getting with the super chat. And I think we got a couple more, but we're going to close out pretty quickly. Dennis Gator, this is the last question for Cody. Since I already know Sean's answer, are you interested in checking out Dakota Johnson's Madam Web movie coming soon? Do you have my answer to that?
I have absolutely zero idea who Madam Web is. I'm assuming it's a Spider-Man character.
Yes.
So this is another Spider-Man villain origin thing like Venom and Morbius.
Essentially, yes.
Dakota Johnson, if I'm correct, that's 50 Shades.
Yeah. Don Johnson star, yeah.
Okay. She's adorable, so I'll pretty much watch anything that she's in, except for the 50 Shades movies, apparently, where that would be the obvious thing I should watch. Madam Web is not a character that by name interests me. So just like with Morbius, that it's going to have an awesome trailer. That's a character where you're just going to have to sell me on it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like you announce a C-level character with an actress that's well known, but not A-list. Like, hey, what do you think about this? Well, I need a lot more information to go from there.
And I don't know where my faith level is so far on these Sony villain origins, because I liked Venom more than the majority. I was very disappointed in Venom 2, which seems to be, I'm in the minority on that one again. Morbius, I've all but lost interest in just because of it having 19 different release dates.
And then they pick April Fool's Day as the final one.
Yeah, exactly. And so if Morbius is awesome, I love the plan of let's set up all these villains. So eventually when we get Tom Holland back, the hard work is already done. And now we can just make movies with all these characters. But they have to have a track record for me to get excited. There's a reason why we'll go to see an MCU movie with a character we've never heard of before and know it's probably going to be good. It's because they did 20 movies before this. Whereas this, I'm 1-0. You know,
they haven't built up the trust. They don't have the track record. Here's an important question. Samneet, Cody do an arm wrestling match with Sean right now. Behave, Samneet. Behave.
Don't wrestle.
Devin, hello with the super chat. Thank you so much. Hello, my dynamic duo. Would you cast Mr. Freeze? Or who would you cast as Mr. Freeze? My pick would be Rami Malek. You can't answer it until you know what the characterization is. Yeah. Like you can't go, well, you can't really do that until you know what they're looking to do.
I've seen a fan casting. I don't know if it was a concept image or someone just brought it up, but assuming that the character would go along with what this actor does, Giancarlo Esposito. I would like to see like a Gus Fring kind of Mr. Freeze. He has that intelligent, psychotic thing to him.
And then can have a emotionless face, monotone, still be very intense and emotional.
Yes.
So that's I like that one. I'll go with your answer on that one.
Mhm.
But just generally speaking, there's character like when you can fan cast like a Nathan Drake because you can like watch these very cinematic
Yeah.
video games and be like, who's someone that could do that?
Yeah.
But when you're talking about with Batman characters, there are many different versions of the characters.
I mean,
there's
just
not
Batman
one rendition.
himself.
There's
you could not put Michael Keaton in Batman v Superman and have that make sense.
Right. And then you think, Adam West,
Even more extreme.
Yeah, like it's not like Adam West did a bad job at what he was asked to do. He did a great job at this very niche version of Batman.
Yeah.
So you have to think about it somewhat in those terms. AJ Taylor, thoughts on Wolfman remake starring Ryan Gosling? Derek Ciofrance, who worked with him on Place Beyond the Pines, is set to direct. I need to see a trailer. I'm not inherently interested in Wolfman. Ryan Gosling is obviously a great actor, but he's a little bit more serious than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't immediately go, "Oh, Ryan Gosling." Oh, he gravitates a little. I'd say pretentious. I don't mean that to be as much of a pejorative as it might be.
After Drive, he kind of took a little bit of a turn with his career where everything you see is like something that would blow up on a film festival, but
right?
Never
Exactly.
Watch again.
Yeah. And so then I kind of see it and I go, I would prefer a more fun Ryan Gosling.
The concept of
continuing Wolfman.
There you go. The concept of continuing this Invisible Man, Blumhouse reinvention of the Universal monsters. The concept of the Wolfman fascinates me because I'm somebody that I've said for years now, like I'm ready for the Twilight stink to go away and we can get vampires and werewolves back again. Ryan Gosling is an awesome actor, so of course he'd probably do a great job. I still have yet to see Place Beyond the Pines, so I really don't know how to gauge that director, what he would bring to it. But if it's going to be something grounded like Invisible Man, that's going to make sense for that to be in that universe, there's something about that kind of fascinates me. So we'll see.
And just a couple closing questions. Sharon, what are your thoughts on John Wick 4? I'm pretty worried about it at this point in time because I didn't like where they ended 3. I felt like they stretched it out. They set up villains only to be like, just kidding. That's going to be in the next one. And they went, we're going to do the next 2 back to back. Just kidding. And then they had writing issues and then, of course, COVID issues. And so it's a movie that seems like they thought they had an idea what they wanted to do. And then it turned into them trying to stretch it out. And they're like, oh, crap, this isn't working. So I'm pretty nervous about it at this point in time.
It's one of those franchises that despite how much I love it, it felt like they had the perfect opportunity to end it
properly, satisfying,
and it felt artificially stretched out with where they ended it. Like John Wick 3, just like ending John Wick 2 of saying, okay, you're now disavowed, the entire world of assassins is going to be after you, and the only way to get out is to literally go to the head of the snake.
Yeah,
that's a perfect third film wrap up, and the action sequences proved like they could have went out on top.
Mm-hmm.
But just saying,
and then
see you next time.
Yeah,
and even the way that they did the whole thing with Ian McShane's character, I still don't even know how to interpret that. Was that him going full villain? Was that him knowing that John Wick's going to come back and they're going to take, I still don't know how to interpret the end of the movie. And him falling off of a 45-story building and living, it's like, okay, now you're stretching it a bit too far. There's
maybe you can't survive that, but I have in the past. So I thought that was believable.
I top out around 25.
Yeah, of course. Clumsy, did you watch Reacher? I posted a review of Reacher. Just look up Sean Chandler Reacher. It's on my second channel, but I already talked. Did you watch it?
No.
It's pretty good. I really dug it. I believe you asked this question yesterday. We answered it. We didn't watch Squid Game, so who knows if it was overrated because we didn't watched it. And find a good final question.
Got a question on slashers.
We'll just close out on that one then. Okay. Why do you guys think that horror slasher franchises, even others like Predator, find it difficult to make sequels highly praised among audiences? Well, I think that a big part of it is that they're fairly tight. It's a tight premise. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, people riding in a van to visit family members, accidentally show up at House of Crazy People. One of them has a chainsaw. That's a very small concept.
Yeah.
It's not 9 movies worth of concept. Guy in Dreams kills teenagers. There's a mythology there of a bunch of things you can do, but the basic premise of what that experience is pretty narrow in size. You go to Camp Crystal Lake and someone starts killing you. You got 2 killers, but it's a very small concept. And I think that's also somewhat why Scream has done a little bit better with sequels, is because they haven't cranked out 1 million of them in a decade. They've done 5 in 25 years. And there's an extra element of the big hook is it's a whodunit, or 2 hooks. It's a whodunit, and it's a commentary on movies. So it has a little bit, an extra layer to it. But when you have a small concept, this guy kills people at this place. When you do that the 5th time, you have to introduce more and more wacky ideas to try and do something fresh and new. Halloween 6, and all of a sudden there's a cult related to him and this deep mythology. Like, what are we talking about here? Or you get into Leatherface with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's like, let's tell his origin story and how he was actually a really sweet guy that was misunderstood. Or you do Texas Chainsaw 3D. It's like, what if he's an anti-hero and you have Alexander Jacob, do your thing, cuz, and throwing him a chainsaw. He's like, you're trying to do something new, but that new idea doesn't fit with the actual original experience. And so you're just either repeating yourself or you're doing something stupid with it.
It's the law of diminishing returns.
Take my 5-minute answer and just say it's the law of diminishing returns.
You have, like you said, a lot of the most celebrated horror films of all time are celebrated because it was this cool original concept. Nightmare on Elm Street, perfect example. What if we take the slasher concept and make it a dream demon that you now have carte blanche to make all these kill scenes? You can't escape him because eventually you're going to have to sleep. Like, all these added layers that kind of answer the questions of, why don't you just run away from Camp Crystal Lake?
Yeah.
And so when you knock it out of the park the first time, and this is why, with the exception of Friday the 13th, most people say the original is the best with Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play. It's because after that, it's just, let's do the same thing, but we'll ramp it up or we'll bring in different characters. Friday the 13th is the exception because the franchise character didn't show up until the 2nd film and really wasn't the iconic presence until the 3rd film. And so everybody's got a different answer for what the favorite Friday the 13th is.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's certain franchises that create a world that lend themselves to a lot of adventures. Mission Impossible, Spy, there's always new threats out there. And they didn't crank out 10 in 10 years. So they spend 5 to 5 years coming up with a new story. You think James Bond, once again, global spy, there's always new spy threats. Same sort of idea, and then they re-up it for each era with the Bond. There's certain premises, certain franchises that lend themselves to ongoing adventures, and other ones very quickly strain credibility. The same Michael Myers going to the same house, the same Elm Street, the same Texas family, you just immediately start going, really? What's going on here? Huh? I think that's a big part of they're just slashers by definition are a tight concept. There's a guy killing people. Girl killing people, person killing people. So quick answer on this one. Are you hoping for Boba Fett season 2? No, I don't think it was a speaking of characters that don't lend themselves to a season worth of story, I think they learned that immediately. That he wasn't a character that lent himself to a story at all. And real quick one on this one to close out, since we're talking about video game movies, I did a video, or what are your thoughts on the Arkham games? I did a video on my top 10 favorite video games. You should go check it out.
I did a ranking of the entire franchise.
He did a ranking of the entire franchise. We have other places, but
awesome. It did
you can't see that thumb.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up.
It did for comic book video games what Batman Begins did for Batman movies.
There you have it. Thank you so much for hosting me at your home, hosting me in your studio, feeding me food, and joining on for this revival episode, this reboot quill episode of the Sean Chandler podcast. Thank all of you so much for watching, commenting, super chatting, liking, sharing, all of that fun stuff. It's always fun to talk movies way too much with you.
Yes.
And all of you keep talking movies too much.
Griffin, you're the legacy character.
There you go.